Hello everyone, and welcome to what I hope will be the first of many video guides on SSTO spaceplanes. As an intro to this series, this will be a general overview of basic concepts and a walkthrough of the design and flight of a big but very efficient cargo SSTO powered by Rapier engines. And then subsequent videos will go into more depth on the aerodynamics and include other designs such as long-range SSTOs and lower-tech SSTOs, etc. So let's begin by talking about how not to make an SSTO. So the biggest mistake I see players make is using too many engines to climb too high, too fast. Everything is about delta V. We need a certain amount of delta V to get to orbit, and using too many engines increases our dead mass that we have to haul to orbit, which hurts our delta V. So bear with me for 1 minute for a quick math break. So the delta V equation looks like this. So our delta V is equal to the natural log of our mass ratio, so our starting mass divided by our ending mass, multiplied by the specific impulse of our engine, multiplied by gravity. And in current and in real life, that's always 9.81 meters per second squared. So we have three variables that we can use to increase our delta V. So our initial mass, we can increase that by just adding more fuel. And then our ending mass, we can decrease this by cutting engines. Engines are the biggest mass hog on the plane, so using as few engines as possible will increase our delta V. And then also we want to use the most efficient engine that we can within reason. Like we don't want to start with a nerve at sea level, but we also want to maximize our more efficient open cycle mode, which has a much higher ISP than our closed cycle mode. And then these all have interplay in between them. So we need a certain amount of thrust to get to orbit. And typically more efficient engines are heavier and produce less thrust. So using a lighter, more powerful engine sometimes will give you more delta V because they don't weigh as much. And then there's also fuel. We need more thrust to get more fuel. So there's a delicate balance going on here. So that covers the first part of the mistakes that I see, the using too many engines. We want to just use enough engines to get just barely enough thrust to get our fuel off of the runway and up into the air. And the other mistake I see is climbing too high, too fast. So if here's Kerbin, you usually see people take off from the runway, and then once they get in the air, they pitch way up and start climbing like crazy. And they're able to do this because they have so many engines. But even if you do have that many engines, it's still not a good idea. Because if your plane is pointed up like this, that means your engine is pointed down like this, and all your thrust is trying to fight gravity. What we want to do is take a more gradual approach so that our engines are always pointing horizontal, and we're building up this speed that we need for orbit. Right? Orbit is about going fast. It's not about going up. If we were to just drop from this point straight down, if we're going very fast, by the time we get down here, we're going to be way over here. So that's what orbit is. We're falling, but we're going so fast that we're missing the planet. So we want our engines to work on our horizontal velocity, and we'll let our wings worry about lift or our altitude. Alright, so let's get into some basic plane terminology. So if we have our plane here, I'm not an artist. There's our wing, our fins. Okay. So if this is the horizon here, perfectly flat, we can see our plane is pointed in this direction. So the angle between where our plane is pointing and the horizon is called our pitch. So we want to keep our pitch nice and low so that our engine can be firing horizontal and building up our orbital velocity. So let's say now that our plane, if this is the horizon, let's say we turn on our engine and we start moving in this direction a little bit. Let's see, our plane is still pointed this way, so gravity is pulling us back down. So this is still our pitch angle, but the angle between where we're going and where we're pointed is called our angle of attack. So this is angle of attack, and this is pitch. So angle of attack is very important because this is where most of the drag comes from. So if this is our angle of attack here, the wind is coming in like this and it's hitting the bottom surface of our plane and creating a lot of drag. There's a lot of surface area here for the wind to hit and slow us down. So what we want to do is have our plane pointed nice and flat with a very low angle of attack so that the wind coming in this way doesn't have as much surface area to hit. But that introduces a problem. All lift in Kerbal Space Program is generated by angle of attack. So if we have a wing here, if the wind is coming in like this, we're not going to generate any lift because our wing has zero angle of attack. If we angle our wing up a bit, then the wind coming in is deflected down, and that generates our lift. So how do we combine these two things? There's two different types of lift, actually three different types of lift in KSP. We have lift created by wings, we have lift created by control surfaces, and we have lift created by body parts, or body lift. Now wing lift has the best, or wing and control surface area, they have the best lift to drag ratio, whereas lift created by body parts creates much more drag than lift. So we want our fuselage to have a very low angle of attack, but we also want our wings to create lift. So what can we do? We can angle our wing on our fuselage so that we can head straight into the wind but still be creating that lift from the wing. So with that in mind, let's get back to the spaceplane hangar and do some designing. So we'll make this a Mark III cargo bay plane. We'll just use two of these things here, and then we can fill them with orange tanks. That'll be our payload. So we'll put some of these orange tanks in here. So these are each 36 tons. It looks like there's another room for this one, which is 18 tons. So 36, 36, and 18, that is 90 tons of payload. And I like to make things symmetric. Okay. So here's our plane so far. We have a 90-ton mass that we want to take to orbit. And we're not going to be using any of the fuel in here, so let's close all of these off. Okay, so if we have the mass of our payload, we can figure out a lot of stuff. So let's go back, do a little bit more math, and a little comparison with rockets. So rockets have a payload fraction, or a well-designed rocket is going to have a payload fraction around 25%. Could be a bit higher, but a well-designed one will have around 25%. Which means that in order to get 25 tons to orbit, we're going to need another 75 tons of rocket, which results in 100 tons total. But SSTOs, or spaceplanes, can be a lot more efficient. So we can get payload fractions up to 50%. So our payload is currently 90 tons, which means our total mass is going to be about 180 tons. So if we have the total mass of our plane, we can figure out how many engines we're going to need. So I like to use 30 to 35 tons per Rapier. And since I want this plane to be a little bit more beginner friendly, let's go with a more powerful plane. So we'll do 30 tons per Rapier. So we're going to need 180 divided by 30. We're going to need 6 engines. We need 6 Rapier engines. And we have our final mass. We can also figure out how much wing we're going to need. So I like to use 5 to 6 tons per meter squared of wing area. And since we're going to have a lot of power with our 6 engines, we can go a little bit less on the wings. So we'll go 6 tons per meter squared. So we're going to need about 30 meters squared of wing area. Now, the only other thing, or the only other major contribution to mass is going to be our fuel. So if we use our Rapiers correctly, if we use them well, we can get up to 1650 to 1700 meters per second on just air breathing alone. And if we look at our orbital velocity, that is around 2300 meters per second. However, this does not take into account the rotation of Kerbin, while this does. So in surface mode on the nav ball, this is going to be our velocity, but once we get into orbit, it's going to switch to orbit mode, which does not take the rotation into account. So really, this is 2100 meters per second if we keep the nav ball in surface mode. So we don't really need that much more delta V to get from open cycle to orbit. We don't need that much closed cycle delta V. So we need at least 400, and then we add in some for aerodynamic drag and losses due to gravity. So overall, I like to use around 600 to 700 meters per second in just closed cycle mode. So that's going to be oxidizer. And then the rest can be liquid fuel for our open cycle mode. So all of this will add up to 180 tons. So let's get back to our plane now. So during this design phase, we want to make sure that we are producing very little drag. And then during flight, we won't worry about drag at all. We'll only worry about gravity. So we want to make things very streamlined. We don't want any sharp turns, and we want to avoid surface attachments. As you see, these little green balls here are attachment nodes. Now if we were to leave that open, there would be a bunch of drag there. But if we can attach a node to it, that whole area is occluded now, so it's not going to produce any drag. And then we'll use these shot cone intakes. These are by far the best intakes in the game for... Hey, where is it? There we go. So these are the best intakes in the game for SSTOs. They're very low drag, and they have a crazy amount of intake air. You can power 10, 11, 12 rapiers with just one of these once you get going fast. And then we'll close off the back here. Alright, so now we have a very streamlined fuselage. So let's take this out a second. We're going to attach this with a docking port here. Gotta make these orange. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. Want this about in the middle. Want this about in the middle. And we're going to sink this down. Okay, so now we'll take this out. And we're going to hook it up in the middle here. So now, the reason I'm putting this in the middle is because we want our payload to be exactly on the center of mass, so that when we get rid of it, our center of mass doesn't move. This will help with balancing our plane out and preventing it from getting all flippy and stuff. So let's get this up out of here, make it look nice, but it's still as low as possible. Okay, and now we can put our payload back in. So we want this docking port to be the root part so we can attach it to that docking port. But right now this is the root part, so we need to use this reroute tool and click on the docking port. And now the docking port is the root part, and we can drop it in here. There we go. Okay, so now if we look at our center of mass, if we take it off, it doesn't move. Or it moves down a little bit, but that's not as important. Oh, whoops. I left the docking port in there. Let's just undo that, get rid of that. But you can see center of mass does not move at all. And because we have our fuel tanks positioned symmetrically here, as our fuel burns, our center of mass won't move. Alright. So next thing we can do is add the wings. So these big S delta wings, these are excellent because they can store fuel as well as being a lifting surface. And even better are these big S wing strakes. They can hold even more fuel per mass. So this is 0.5 tons, it can hold 300, and this is 0.1 ton, it can hold 100. So you can either use one of these or 5 of these. But it's a lot easier to use these. They're a lot bigger, less parts, and we should not be too strapped for liquid fuel. So we want to position our main wings right on the center of mass, and we needed 30 meters squared of wing area, and these have a wing area of 5 each, so we're going to need 6 of them total, so 3 on each side. So I like to position these like this. And then we need one more. And we don't want our plane to go backwards, so let's flip these around. That looks better. Okay, so let's look at our aerodynamic overlay, and let's put our center of lift right on our center of mass there. Okay, so now with our center of lift right on our center of mass, our plane is going to be very neutral, and then once we put the tail plane on here, it'll be very stable and not flip at all. So let's get a small delta wing here. There we go. So this will be our tail plane. Oops. This thing's going crazy. It doesn't like being that far down. Okay. Okay. And then, so that's our vertical stabilizer. That'll prevent us from yawing out of control. And then this will be our horizontal stabilizers, and we'll put our pitch surfaces on the back of these. Alright, so that looks nice. Okay, so now we've got our basic design here. We can see that our center of lift is slightly behind our center of mass. But remember, we wanted some angle of incidence so that when we're flying perfectly straight, we're still making lift. So I'm going to use this rotate tool on absolute mode. I'm going to hold shift with this toggle snap on, and we're going to rotate it one click, and that'll be, oops, that was 2 clicks. So 1, and then that is 5 degrees. So each of the little fine ticks while holding shift down is 5 degrees. So right now our wings have an angle of incidence of 5 degrees. And we'll move that's okay right there. Alright, so we're going to get some ailerons here. So these are going to control our roll. Actually, I should have put those on before I tilted everything here. Okay, there we go. So we've got a 5-degree angle of attack here, or 5-degree angle of incidence, and nothing here. We also forgot to add our pitch surfaces. Okay, so we want these to only do pitch. And we want these to only do roll. So we want the control surfaces to be as far from the center of mass in their control axis as possible. So pitch is rotating the plane this way. So we want our we want our control surfaces to be either way back here or way up here, as far from the center of mass in this axis as possible. And then roll is like this. So we want our control surfaces that do roll to be as far from the center of mass in this axis as possible. So that's why you typically see ailerons at the tips of wings and elevators at the back of the plane. Alright, so our plane is taking very good shape now. We need some sort of control, command and control here. So let's open this up and put some things in here. Okay, that did not end up in the right position. We want it over. There we go, we got it. Okay, and then we can put our, use a probe core here as well. I don't know where that went. Oh, it's way over there. Nope, still over there. This is annoying. Sometimes these camera angles can be very frustrating. We want this one. Where is it? Nope, down there. There we go. Okay. And then a battery will be nice as well. And a little solar panel. Remember, we want to limit the amount of dry mass on this thing, so just the bare minimum. We don't need two of them, just need one. Okay. Alright. And we don't really want those to open into the wing, so let's go down to, let's do 85. Okay. So let's do some action groups here. We want to, I like putting our payload bay on 10 or 0. Alright, now we need some landing gear. We'll put the large ones here. Actually, I want to put these on the engines. So we have 143.675 tons of the 180 tons that we allotted ourselves. So now if we mount our engines, okay, we got our rapier. Okay, so we're going to be burning through all of our liquid fuel in our wings and these things here with our open cycle mode. And then with closed cycle, we'll use these oxidizing liquid fuel. So if we switch this to closed cycle mode, and if we add three of them, I want these to be flat. We want it to mirror symmetry. Yeah, good enough for calculating. Okay, we can see that we have 637 meters per second. And I think we wanted around 700, so let's add a little bit of fuel here. Let's make that the attachment point, make it flatter. Okay. We can add some of these. Okay, so now we have 6 engines, we have more fuel, and we're up to almost 700, so that's good right there. So let's get rid of these, and then we want to fill up our liquid fuel now. And then we want to make sure that these are on open cycle, and we want manual switching. So when you first place it, the default is automatic, so you gotta switch it to manual. And then we want to add these like this. Okay, so we want to put our engines right on our center of mass. So we want our center of mass to stay in the middle there. About. We can kind of move it around. We can move it back a little bit so that it's not shooting through the wing. We can kind of move them out. Like so. There, that looks okay. Alright, so now we go to action groups, and we can, I like setting, oh, I should have done this before. Oh well. If we just do it, if we set it with one engine, we can just duplicate and that'll carry over all of these action groups. But there's only 6 engines, shouldn't take too long. So I like having one be the switch mode. I'm gonna do that for all of these. Okay, so now when I press 1, it'll go from air breathing to closed cycle. Okay, so now we can add our landing gear. So we use the large ones there, and the medium one, the biggest one that has steering, on the front here. Okay, so now we can start lining everything up. So if we turn on our, let's turn on our center of thrust. We see that because we have our payload up a bit higher on that docking port, right there, our center of mass is a bit higher. So we need to move our engines up so that they're firing straight through the center of mass. So I'm going to just move them up a little bit right now, just so I can line this up perfectly. So I want those to fire straight through the center of mass there. So that way there's no torque induced by the engines. In the atmosphere it's not a huge deal because we've got these control surfaces that are very far from the center of mass, so they have a very long lever arm to control our pitch. But in space we just have that tiny reaction wheel here. So we want to make sure that we're firing through the center of mass. Okay. And now we can line up our landing gear. So we want these to be about level. Let's bring this up a little bit. See, it's still a little bit lower, so we'll go up one more. There we go, that looks good. Now we can put it back in the middle of our craft. And bring it back forward. Like so. And we want our rear gear to be just behind the center of mass. Maybe forward a little bit. Because we want the plane to be pretty much balanced on these rear gear. We want them to have all of the load. And we'll increase the spring strength and damper a bit. So that way, when we're sitting on the runway, it takes very little to pitch the plane back. Where's that center of thrust way over there? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, that one's still in closed cycle. Okay. That's better. Air breathing, air breathing, air breathing. Okay. That looks better. Alright, so now we're at 172 tons. We have 8 tons left that we can use before we get to that 180 ton limit. And then yeah, so the rest is just liquid fuel. So I like using these tiny little Mark 0 liquid fuel fuselages because they have a better mass ratio than all these cylindrical tanks, all these other cylindrical tanks. These are all 9:1. This one is 11:1. So we're going to add, around, let's not go over 180 tons. Let's just add around 6 tons more liquid fuel. That should probably be good enough. So 6 tons is going to be 1,200 units. So we're going to want 12 on each side. So we go 3, 6, 12. Okay, and then we can put these at the bottom of the cargo bay since there is there's space down there. I want to move these so that there's 6 on each side, so 2, 4, 6. So I want that one to be right on the center line, like that. Okay. Alright, so one other thing that I haven't talked about is auto struts. Auto struts are very nice. They add a lot of structural stability without adding any mass or parts. So you can see landing gear have the auto strut locked to the heaviest part. And with a long string of parts like this, it can get pretty wobbly. So let's use some auto strut to lock this down. So I'll use auto strut to no, I won't auto strut this one. I want to auto strut to this part that is going to be this cargo bay. So I'm going to use the grandparent strut. So I started with this one and then went to this one. So this one, this is the parent for this one, and this is the grandparent for this one. So by using grandparent, we've locked this side to this tank, and then over here we can use the root part, because this is the one we started with. This is our root part, so now we have this side locked to this one, this side locked to this one, and then for some structural stability in between here, we can use the grandparent. And this attaches over symmetry. So you can see that doing the grandparent on this one, it put a strut here and here, and same on this side. So it creates this very strong pattern here. So I want to do that a few times. Just make this nice little pattern all the way down here. So now we've got a very rigid structure there. No way that's going to cause us any problems. Alright, so now we can put this into our payload bay here so it doesn't create any drag. Nestled nice and neat in there. And it's not touching anything. Okay. Alright, so another thing I like to auto strut are wings. And we want to use grandparent auto strut like we did here and get this nice cross pattern. So we got something like that, and we'll do it also for the engines. It's got those nice cross patterns there. And then I also want to tie it back. So we get one going here and one going here. So let's use our grandparent to go back there. And then our root there. So we've got these nice supports going on here, and then we'll send one to go all the way through our plane. So we'll do root part to go all the way through there, and root part. Okay, so we've got one auto strut going right down the middle of our plane, a bunch of supports for our wings and engines, and then struts for our landing gear. And that should be good. So we've got 178.76 tons, so we're going to have a payload fraction of slightly better than 50%. We've got our 30 tons per rapier. We've got our 6 tons per wing area. We've got our oxidizer, our liquid fuel. We're ready to go. Okay, so let's head out to the runway and see if we can fly this thing to orbit. I'll see you there. Alright, so I'm going to switch over to voiceover mode so we can speed up some of this footage. So first thing I'm going to do is bring up the Aero GUI. This will give us a lot of useful information. So we go to Physics, then Aero, and Aero GUI. And there we go. Lots of great information. So you notice I'm not starting at full throttle. The shotgun intake can provide 4 rapiers with intake when we're standing still. But as we get moving, we can go full throttle. So take a look down at the bottom left corner. My mouse should move there any second now. I'm going to use trim here. Hold Alt and press S to bring that up to around halfway. That'll hopefully give us enough pitch to get in the air after we leave the runway here. And most of my input is just going to be roll to keep it on track. So a little bit of pitch up there, and it's not quite enough, so I'm going to manually give it a little bit more so we don't hit the water. And now the faster we get going, the less pitch we're going to need. And the main thing I'm looking at right now is that climb rate on the aero GUI. I want to keep it around 0 meters per second as we accelerate here at sea level. So I'm going to continually pitch down or trim down with Alt and W just to keep that climb rate around 3, or not around 3, around 0. And the faster we get going, the more lift we create and the less pitch we need. So our angle of attack is going to continually decrease here as we pick up speed, which improves our drag, which lets us go even faster. So it's a positive feedback loop going on here. And eventually we're going to get to a point where our angle of attack is close to 0, and that's when we're just going to let the nose come up and we're going to start climbing. So we just keep an eye on that climb rate. It goes a little negative, that's okay. We're not in any danger of hitting the water. We just want to look at that angle of attack and climb rate. So angle of attack is getting pretty low now. It's almost 0, so I'm going to start letting the nose come up. Our Mach number is about 1.3. That's also on the aero GUI there. And that's pretty much the right time you want to start climbing. That's when the rapiers are starting to produce a lot of thrust. Now I don't want to go over a pitch of 15 degrees here, so I'm going to start trimming down even more to try to keep that pitch down. It's about 13.2 now. That's about as high as you want to go. So I keep trimming down here, and eventually we're going to climb up to this thinner atmosphere, and we're not going fast enough to create enough lift, so our nose is going to start coming back down. We want it to be about at the horizon by the time we get to 14 or 15 kilometers. At which point we're going to turn on SAS and we're going to lock in surface prograde, and we're going to hold that all the way to orbit. So we should do it right about now. So we're going over to SAS and then we lock prograde. So now I'm bringing up the front and back fuel tanks to kind of move a little bit of fuel around to get this angle of attack close to 0 as possible. So it's a little negative now, so I'm going to move some fuel out of the front and into the back to move our center mass back a little bit. And now that angle of attack is really close to 0, which is ideal. So look at that drag. Only 250 kilonewtons of drag going Mach 5 at 15 kilometers in this giant plane. So we're just going to hold this here as we accelerate. Our climb rate is going to rise and fall as we get up to higher, thinner atmosphere. We'll create less lift, so our nose will go back down, and then we'll get to thicker atmosphere, and then our wings will get more lift and we'll come back up. So that this kind of wave pattern is called a phugoid, and it's alright. It's not the most efficient, but we have very little drag, so it's not a big deal. So right now I'm just looking at this surface velocity on the nav ball, looking at the angle of attack. We want to get to around 1700 meters per second, which is where we are right now, and we want to burn off most of our liquid fuel, and we're almost there. So we're gonna switch over to closed cycle mode any second now. So the way to figure out how much liquid fuel you have dedicated just to open cycle, you can multiply your oxidizer number, which mine is 12,760, by 9/11. That's the ratio of liquid fuel to oxidizer in these tanks. And that comes out to around 10,440 liquid fuel. So I was a little above that when we switched over. But like I said, we're still locked in this prograde hold. It takes very little input. And we're just going to keep accelerating to orbit here. You can see on the bottom left I switched over to maneuver mode. So we can see our apoapsis and periapsis. Our periapsis got really high, or not really high, but very close to 0, and our apoapsis got to around 70 kilometers, and we killed all our engines, and now we're just coasting up to space. So that's pretty much it for the ascent. We just got to finish circularizing, and then we can drop off our payload and come on home. So just to overview, we locked in surface prograde at 15 kilometers and hardly touched anything. All we did was switch over to closed cycle mode when we ran out of liquid fuel. Alright, so we got our circularization burn coming up here. And let's see how much delta V we're left with. Around 66 meters per second. That's plenty to rendezvous with the space station to drop off these full tanks of fuel. Let's see. So I'll show that these tanks are empty here. Or tanks are full, sorry. There we go. And we can get rid of them and get ready for the return burn. So I like to do my re-entry burn right around this crater here. So we flip over to retrograde, and now we have 211 meters per second after we got rid of that big mess of payload. I like to burn till we're just west of that peninsula there. And now I'm going to lock in radial out to create as much drag here as possible until the plane can't handle it anymore and it pitches back down. So now I like to look at my trajectory on the map there and kind of make sure it stays near the runway. Go back and forth between plane mode and map mode to kind of keep an eye on things. And the more you do this, the better feel you'll get to what kind of speed or altitude you should be at. But yeah, for the most part, it's pretty easy once you do it a few times. Kind of trial and error. So use that quick save and quick load as much as you need. So I'm a little to the left of the runway here. I'm a little high up, so I'm gonna pitch down, try to bleed off some more of the speed in the thicker atmosphere, and bank over to kind of align myself with the runway. Still going pretty fast, so I need to get down lower quicker. So we want to land at about 70 meters per second. This thing will glide for a long time without that heavy payload in it and no fuel. So we can be nice and slow here, get nice and low and slow, and take our time in lining up this approach. This is sped up, but so it looks a lot more difficult than it really was. So we're getting nice and slow, and we kind of just want to stall right onto the runway. And there we go. So that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below, and I will definitely get back to you. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.